Hey.
Hey.
How you doing?
Great.
Great.
Kory's camouflage. We can't see it.
Yeah, Kory's.
I wore my camouflage.
Kory is a love seat.
Being told there might be a couple of Jenny's assassins in the room, so just trying to not make myself too easy a target.
It's a big Miami Vice look.
Yeah, well,
You're really the only thing about
I promise to do a
Conservative Party that's
burnout with
appealing to
the
boomers
Corvette
right
out
now.
front later.
Exactly,
so
yeah.
We'll
I don't
do
really
that.
like these chairs. I think they make
No?
me fat. They're kind of puffy.
You are fat.
Dennis!
Cozy.
All right. So first of all, I want to thank Dennis and Creative Currency for having us here tonight, and all the sponsors tonight. It's we love doing live events, even when there are empty chairs. But someday we'll fill a joint. Anyway, we're all thrilled to be here. We haven't drunk as much as we might have before this, so I think maybe things will be okay. What I thought we would do tonight, for the miserable, glorious, accursed that are out there, is I have seat projections.
Ooh.
I have seat projections. So I thought we'd go through the seat projections first, and then I thought we would look at each campaign, because we're getting to the short strokes now, and it's kind of time to get retrospective. Look at each campaign and say, what's the best thing they did, and what's the worst thing they did in this campaign? And I say this to all of you at the same time as I'm saying it to them. They had no idea what this show was going to be about tonight. So let me start off with our seat projections. And wait a second, I have an important professional role here, and I have to get it on my phone, as it turns out. Poilievre's polling is brought to you by Enbridge. I should know this off by heart, shouldn't I? I really should know this
100%.
by heart. You know, when I was younger, I would have. My brain is not working like it used to. Poilievre polling is brought to you by Enbridge, a leading Canadian energy infrastructure company, reliably and affordably fueling your quality of life and powering our economy. So there we go. There you go.
Enbridge.
I love their energy tastes great. I love those guys.
Okay, so Poilievre says that the range for the Liberals is 171 to 210. That the range for the Conservatives is 112 to 136. The range for the NDP is 4 to 14. The range for the Bloc is 16 to 23, and the range for the Greens is 0 to 2. Now, I've got regionals, if you want them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm okay.
Let's start with the NDP.
Atlantic, Liberals 25 to 27, Conservatives 5 to 7, NDP 0, Greens 0. Quebec, Liberals 42 to 50, Conservatives 10 to 13, NDP 1 to 2, Bloc 16 to 23. Ontario, Liberals 76 to 90, Conservatives 32 to 42, NDP 0 to 3.
0. That's a small number.
Greens 0 to 1. Manitoba, Saskatchewan, I'm not even going to read you this because it's such bullshit. But anyway, they say 6 to 10 for the Liberals, 17 to 19 for the Conservatives, and 1 to 3 for the NDP. Alberta, 3 to 5 Liberals, 31 to 33 Conservatives, 1 New Democrat. And BC, 17 to 25 Liberals, 17 to 22 Conservatives, 1 to 4 New Democrats. So a lot of seats still in play if you look at those ranges in British Columbia, which is why everybody's going to be there, why Carney was there today, and why everybody is going to be there. So, Scott, lead us off. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'm awfully glad. I've never wanted to be a New Democrat, and no, I mean, I think the most interesting part of the country, obviously based on that data and everything that we watched, is BC, and it'll be interesting to see exactly who muckles out on top. But I'm a homer, so I'll be particularly curious about Ontario. And every time I talk about my room full of worries and I start stressing about where we're going to be and how we're going to, I get like floods of emails from friends who are saying, telling you, we got a note today from Kathleen Wynne. She used to be the premier of this middle province of our country. And she was like, I was out knocking on doors. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're going to be on the high range of that spread.
You know, just as the Liberals on this panel, let's just have a moment.
Let's have a moment.
Let's just have a moment, you and I.
What a rarity.
You want me to light a cigarette for you? Like, how's this going to be?
That comes after.
Okay.
6 months ago, we weren't sure the Liberal Party would finish third,
No kidding.
right? This has been, not to overstate it, the most dramatic turnaround, enduring, lasting turnaround in Canadian history. So,
It is unprecedented. And I don't think I'm going to spike the football here on the 3rd-yard line and go, woo, right? But literally, how long did we talk on the pod about the existential threat that the Liberal Party faced and the fear that it would be not 2011 for the Liberals, but a Liberal result like 1993. And that was entirely plausible. 4 months to the day today, December 23rd, I flew to California, something you can no longer do without pissing on the flag, to meet my family for the holidays. When I got off the plane, there was a guy I was thinking about running for the Liberal leadership, called me. And so I returned his call, and his argument was, I really think that I can hold the Conservatives to a minority. That was the best case scenario, and that was and my argument was, don't be fucking silly, right? That was on December 23rd. 4 months to the day.
unbelievable.
Here we are. It's startling.
All right, hey, Jordan, I know you're hiding.
And you like this story too, right, Jordan?
I love this story.
Yeah, and you're hiding, but I'm going to call you out here.
It's okay, I'm not hiding.
And
I'm ready for it.
you know, so I start with the fact that Scott and I were wrong, and Deb Hutton was wrong too. She's not here, but I'll just malign her without her being here.
Yeah.
The three of us were wrong about the number of seats the NDP were going to win in the provincial election because the seat models based on the popular vote indicated one thing, and then the actual on-the-ground result yielded another thing. So I've got two questions for you. Are you confident that the ground organization will deliver something on the upper end of the range I described, or better? And second of all, what's next if it's the lower end of the range?
So I think that it's worth pointing out that the Ontario election is a bit of an aberration in terms of the over-representation and the seat count for the NDP. That's not normally what happens, but I do think it's instructive for two reasons. So first, it's recent, and a lot of the machinery that went into those holds is still fresh and is being employed in this campaign by the federal party. And secondly, because it was a campaign run in the same sort of existential Trump circumstance that we're facing federally. But of course, the big difference is that in Ontario, the NDP was facing, prior to the campaign, a roughly equalized force in the Ontario Liberal Party, and that's not the case federally. I do think the ground operation is where the federal NDP has invested strongly. And I think that it will yield benefits, I think, better than predicted in the ranges that you talked about in BC. But look, I mean, it's going to be a real fight. This is an incredibly difficult situation for the NDP. It's like being crushed between two boulders, between the repelling factor of Poilievre for progressive voters and the fear factor for Trump. They're just getting flattened. And so I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be a fight to get to 12, and that will be the win for the party if they're able to do so.
Right. As the Trump administration continues disrupting the Canada-US trade relationship, it's reassuring to know CANDU reactors are Canadian-designed, and they're helping to ensure our energy security. CANDU reactors have been powering the Canadian economy for more than 60 years. Current CANDUs have been updated and modernized to meet today's standards, but there's a need to build new reactors in Ontario to buttress our existing high-functioning fleet and help secure our energy independence with clean baseload power. These reactors also provide critical access to life-saving medical isotopes used in hospitals across Canada and around the world. Unlike other large reactor technologies that rely on foreign sources of enriched uranium, CANDU reactors use natural uranium mined and prepared in Canada. President Trump can't mess with our fuel. Equally important, the construction of the next generation of large reactors in Ontario help ensure our skilled manufacturing base of high-paying union jobs, threatened by Trump's tariffs, will be in demand as we build a fleet of reactors in the decades to come. These large CANDU reactors will provide Ontario with much-needed additional power. At the same time, investments in small modular reactors will be necessary too, particularly in remote locations for resource development. CANDU technology, designed by Canadians, built by Canadians, for the benefit of Canadians. Let's get moving. What do you think about the fact that Carney didn't say majority today? The media pressed him to say majority today.
Yeah.
He wouldn't say it.
And I mean, others are sure saying it, right? And I think it's smart for him not to say it. There's an element of measuring the drapes there that is distasteful, I think, to a lot of voters in Canada. And he doesn't necessarily need to say it. It's out there, right? And I think that as we've seen shifts in public opinion about the probability of the Liberals winning government, Canadians are already getting there. They're already thinking that. And so I think he's right to not risk it by appearing too arrogant. And certainly part of that, I think, is a consideration about how to hold some of those NDP voters that they've scooped up and how to keep them there and how to not scare them back to the NDP.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Kory, you've gotten more press in this campaign than Jagmeet Singh has.
Wasn't intentional.
And the suits are almost as nice.
It was not intentional. How come you guys didn't get this?
Not intentional. You can't say that. Not
Look,
intentional.
you guys
said it over and over extremely loudly.
Well, you guys said over and over again extremely loudly that the carbon tax had to go and that Trudeau had to go. And somehow you're not on the fucking news every night. So I don't know whether it's my tailor or whether it's like your tone of voice or I don't know. But like for some reason, although I actually credit the two of you more than almost anyone in the country in the Liberal Party for actually banging the drum around the need to change leadership of the Liberal Party and to change the positioning on the carbon tax. You guys have been saying this for a very long time, and including when no one else would say it, when people would say it elsewhere, but not publicly. And just to, pat our little podcast on the back, that is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to have real conversations, not, talking points, news network conversations where we all spar and then go for a beer afterwards. We're actually trying to talk about what's going on in our own parties and to level some criticism. And I think, you guys are should be standing very tall and proud right now in terms of the advice that you were giving the Liberal Party and the fact that it's gone that way. Look at the difference that's made. Like there was conversations whether the Liberal Party would achieve party status that were pretty serious. Like we've had that conversation. I think, Scott, you were at one point saying you're banging on the pipes of the submarine to try to show that there's someone alive inside.
Those were the days.
It was that bad.
It was absolutely that bad. And, as much as I would like our little podcast to take credit, it felt like we were shouting into the void. And my blessing is, no matter what I say day to day or week to week, my blessing is forever to Christy Freeland. Right? Like she just has my eternal fucking blessing.
And send her a fruit basket.
She is the heroine of the entire story as far as I'm concerned.
She woke up one morning and said, pistols, I think, pistols.
So, Kory, to get back to it, you just ran a campaign, and I know this because I've been getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning for months now to do daily coverage of campaigns. You just ran a campaign in which the Conservatives got almost 100 seats, right? In Ontario, right? And won the government easily and decisively. So, this seat projection by Poilievre says the Conservatives are going to get between 35 and 40 seats in Ontario. So given all that you've had to say about this campaign over the month it's been on or so, what is your considered take now on why that is occurring?
Well, I think campaigns are won and lost largely because they're so short in duration before they start. And the frame that you put out there and the position that you have going into that, you're not completely locked in. There's room for some pivoting and maneuvering within the context of a campaign, but it's so short. It should be a layup. It should be a confirmation process of a ballot question that's already well established. And I think the challenge that the Conservatives had is they had not just a winning ballot question, they had the winningest ballot question that a Conservative Party has had federally in probably a few generations. And I would say for the provincial campaign, we were largely on the same ballot question for most of 2024. We were running ads featuring Justin Trudeau and the carbon tax and affordability. We were leading with all those same issues. But we were watching the polling in December and out canvassing and doing all of that and seeing this sea change. And sea change is like an understatement. It's more like a tsunami. When Trump started, having the pre-president White House at Mar-a-Lago, meetings and statements and all of that, in the 51st state, a turning point for me was for some of this was like watching the reception that Wayne Gretzky was getting. This is a guy who was the most popular Canadian and most known Canadian for 40 fucking years. And he's getting booed by Canadians. Yeah. Because he, kind of seemed to be playing along with the 51st state stuff and being silent and going golfing with Trump after and all of that. Like there is something that is happening here, and it is in the same way we saw during the pandemic or in the 08-09 campaign with the global financial crisis, one issue that just wipes all the other issues off the table. And that's maybe a bit of an overstatement in this campaign because I think affordability issues and other things still exist. But in terms of what has moved voters, there's one issue that's moved voters. The affordability thing, works for the Conservatives to a point, but it's more of a vote retention strategy for part of the coalition that they'd established before. The voters that have left the Conservative Party have left over that issue. And let's just be clear when we talk about the Conservative base is 55 plus voters. Mostly men, but also women. Normally the Conservatives lose all female demographics except for one, and that's the one, 55 plus women. We are getting absolutely fucking slaughtered in the 55 plus women
20
category.
Points.
Why?
20 points.
Well, it's happening because they hate Trump. They hate everything about Trump. They hate anyone who sounds like Trump. They hate anyone who feels like they're Trump. And that's, I think, what's driving that. And for 55 plus men, it's maybe a little bit different. And this is where, the affordability issue is more complicated than people think. If you are established with a home, and I'm sure you've all seen the reverse home mortgage ads and all of that populate every news channel, the largest asset that most retired people have is their house. And if you're telling somebody who's doing their reverse home mortgage that your $2 million house is going to be worth $1.5 million, they're thinking about at what point they're going to have to switch to cat food. It is not a popular idea for those people. And nor is a fourplex on their street, nor is a condo tower that blocks out their view of the CN Tower or whatever. It is an issue that is not a universally good issue for voters. It splits very differently on those lines. You also have people who are relying on
I have said
investment
before,
income.
just FYI, I have said before that I really want young people to be able to afford houses.
Yeah.
But not mine.
Yeah, right,
Right.
exactly.
Really not mine.
But that's a universal thing. But the market turmoil,
What are
all
those
of that.
bland Soviet-style houses that Carney wants to build everywhere?
That's a starter,
right?
But when you're on a
All
fixed
interesting.
income and you're dealing with savings that are invested in markets and all of this churn, all of this instability, all of that is really toxic. And I think for those voters, for the 55 plus male voters, I think they are thinking of it more as a job application process. And they were really down with Poilievre when he was bringing the lumber to Justin Trudeau. But now that he's gone and all of that's gone, they're looking at who's going to keep my pension investments safe. And in that job interview process, Carney is scoring much higher than Poilievre. And so we're seeing that in terms of what the leadership scores are looking like. The race between the parties is much tighter than the race between the leaders.
Oh, yeah.
Carney is winning best prime minister by far more than the Liberal Party is winning this election.
Because he's dragging a 10-year-old government around with him.
Right. It's like swimming with an anvil tied to your leg, right? Like it's not a good experience. But at the personal level, and these races, as you guys know, often presidentialized in terms of who's leading the top of the ballot. Carney is a ballot poll. And Poilievre is a ballot drag. And one has had a much more leader-centered campaign up until a few days ago. And that's the Conservatives, which is, I think, kind of pulling them down. On the seat projections, I want to say something nice about the NDP, because I normally don't. We come from a part of the country where the NDP fight to win, and they fight fucking hard. And they are able to win governments and hold them for long periods of time and all of that. I agree with everything that Jordan said about what's pushing the NDP out right now. But whether they make party status or not, the NDP will resurrect itself federally because there are very deep roots in parts of this country and they're not going away. And so it'll change the party in some way. They'll learn something from this. But even if they don't achieve party status, the NDP will come back. As for the rest of the seat projections, look, I'm more focused on what happens in Quebec right now because I think the Atlantic Canada, it's almost a write-off at this point. That's not changing. The numbers in Ontario haven't really changed in 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It seems quite stable out there. I think there's a lot of variance in those seat totals because of parts of the GTA. Suburbs that skew younger, younger families, newer families, a little bit more working class.
Well, the part of the GTA the Liberals are worried about is York.
Yeah. Well, and they should be. That's where some of the strongest seats for the Conservatives are. But younger ridings that are in that belt are going to be close. They're going to be really close. And any of the regional data, even in our provincial polling where we get a lot more granularity in those regions, they're going to be surprises in those. And they're going to be dice rolls where it's very close. And who those break for will have a big impact on what that range looks like. I mostly agree with the range that Poilievre has, but I think that range is very fluid, right? There's very good outcomes for the Conservatives and there are less good outcomes and very good ones for the Liberals and less good ones. But I think there are going to be a lot of tight races, but they're not going to be in Toronto. They're not going to be in southwestern Ontario. They're not going to be in eastern Ontario. They're going to be in the 905 belt, and I think they'll probably break in the way that we've seen in the past. Stuff that's closer to the lake, that's wealthier, the Liberals will win probably handily. So I'm thinking Burlington, Oakville, Mississauga seats, Etobicoke Lakeshore. I think they'll do fine there. I think when you get to the western or eastern GTA rather, I think they're going to be closer. I think some of those will be quite close.
But the Conservatives can't win without doing well in the western GTA.
Yeah, and look, Peel region is a weird region for vote.
Weirdly governed.
But Brampton has a tendency to vote for whoever's going to win the election and vote for them in a bigger fashion. I think there's a bit of a
Drive-by slur.
I think a lot of Brampton doesn't. It's not a partisan affiliation. These are not conservative voters or NDP voters or Liberal voters. They are voting for the government voters.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of tilts that part of the Western GTA towards Carney. Mississauga's a little different. Those are closer races generally. And I think it'll be close this time too. But the weird thing that's happened, if you're in the 80s, the stuff by the lake was the only seats the Conservatives could win. Now they're the ones that are always the most at risk. They're too prosperous, they're too upper income, they're too old.
Yeah. People might have a university degree.
Right, which is actually another problem.
Hey, David, can we?
Everyone should get dumber, David.
There's a good chance you're actually watching or listening to this episode on today's sponsor, YouTube. YouTube's mission is to give everyone a voice and show them the world. At the heart of that mission are the incredible creators that educate, entertain, and inspire billions of people every day. As we often do, Canadian creators punch above their weight on the global stage on YouTube. Over 90% of the watch time of Canadian creators' content on YouTube comes from viewers outside of Canada, helping to build a vibrant creator economy across this country that contributes $1.8 billion to Canada's GDP and supports the equivalent of 30,000 full-time jobs. And the YouTube team here in Canada works full-time to help Canadian creators grow, including podcasters like yours truly. In fact, YouTube is now the most listened to podcast platform in Canada. So I don't think YouTube would mind me using their ad time to remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to Air Quotes Media on YouTube.
Can we interrupt the pod for two quick things?
Can you what?
Can we interrupt the pod for two quick things?
What do you got?
One, would it fucking kill Rosenberg to bring us a round of drinks? Two, does anybody know what the score of the Habs game is?
No score.
There you go.
All right.
Jordan,
Yes, David.
my conversations with you have led me to believe that you have a peculiar fascination with Pierre Poilievre. And you study him carefully, and you watch his events, and you analyze his events, you think about his events. So my question to you is, do you think he could have run a different campaign? I mean, there is a consensus that they had to have a different focus in the months after Trump became president that allowed them not to lose the Canada positioning as badly as they've lost it to the Liberals. Maybe they could never win it, but they couldn't lose it as badly as they're losing it. But that would have required a different campaign from the Conservatives, but he is their campaign. So it would have required a different campaign from him.
And should he have stayed with the double knit T-shirts that fit so
That's a
tightly?
truly tough call because the ab definition was pretty good. I don't know. Yeah, I love that question because I do find him really fascinating as a political creature. I think maybe like many of us, I started in student politics, and I've known people like Pierre, and I think that. There's something inherently interesting about someone who imagines themselves in elected office when they're 14. And there's something really interesting about somebody who claims to have not altered their worldview in that time. And I guess I would answer the question by saying that I had a different answer at the start of the campaign than I do at the end of the campaign. At the start of the campaign, I think I would have said, yes, they could have run a different campaign. They could have made different choices, particularly in early December when the Trump threat was really becoming apparent. I think the first major error that they made was during the discussion around border security and fentanyl, when he rushed to agree with Trump's criticism. It immediately put him on the wrong side of that divide.
Yep.
And I'm not sure that they really recovered from that. And I think that there were a number of moments over the course of the campaign where he had a bigger opportunity to differentiate himself from Trump, to be cheering for Canada, if you will, to be cheering for the success of the Canadian government in combating the tariffs, sort of particularly at the beginning of April. And he never really seemed to take those opportunities. And I think early in the campaign, I would have said, I think that he was capable of taking that risk, reaching out beyond his base for a growth strategy, and that the campaign, which is, I should say, like full of smart and professional people, would be capable of doing that. But I think as we come to the end of the campaign, I have a different answer. And I think that they tried. I think that they tried within the best of their ability to make that shift. And you can pinpoint it to a number of moments in the campaign where you saw shifts in his rhetoric, where you saw shifts in their branding. And it was always something you would see. You would see it for a day, two, it would hold for maybe 3 days, and then back would come that same rhetoric, that same sort of Trumpy stuff that had put him in this position in the first place. And so I guess I end the campaign with a different take, which is that I don't think that they could run a different campaign with this guy. I think that he believes in doing it his way more than he believes in wanting to take a risk that would allow him to win. And that's something that I think will obviously be a point of significant reflection for the Conservatives if the results are close to what's projected there.
Yeah. You know, Scott, Jenny Byrne was an OG Curse of Politics member, and the three of us dissected and analyzed the Scheer defeat and the O'Toole defeat. And she would always look at us and tell us, you don't know fuck nothing about politics, because we kept saying they gotta get rid of these issues that margin, like guns and this kind of crap, and they've gotta have an environmental plan of some note, and you gotta moderate in order to win. And she would say, no, there's plenty enough Conservatives out there. We just gotta find them, mobilize them. So the reason I say all that is because they're going to get a very, very high vote for the Conservative Party.
Exactly.
They are going to get more votes by a mile than O'Toole or Scheer got. They're going to get more than Harper got in any election other than 2011. And I think, you know, it's a rare Conservative win throughout history. Or a rare election throughout history that the Conservatives have gotten, say, 39% of the vote. Let's say that that's what they get. So it turns out, though, that in this election dynamic, 39% isn't enough.
Right.
And what did they do themselves to create that dynamic? Because if there's a strategic flaw in their campaign, that's got to be one of them.
So I think I have an answer to that. I think I have two answers to that, one of which has been said many times on the pod by someone else here on this luxuriant white couch. But I think I really want to, like, people will walk away from this campaign, and there will be a percentage of people inside the Conservative Party, outside of the Conservative Party, that will conclude that Jenny's thesis was wrong and disproven by this campaign. And I think that's probably wrong. I think that conclusion would be deeply flawed and terribly unfair to her. Because if her thesis was, let's take a talented campaigner, drive hard, stay hard, right? And she knew they weren't going to win 46% of the vote. But if you can win 37 to 40% of the vote, well, then by any historical standard, that means that's a Conservative government. And she's going to have achieved that watermark, and she'll have done it her way. And I don't know that thesis will therefore have been disproven. And I think there could be a terribly unfair judgment remedy. But
they ran a campaign that scared the bejesus out of New Democrats.
So this is the problem. So the first thing, obviously, the thing that was out of their control and they didn't react well to, and possibly couldn't have reacted well to, was suddenly an issue came along that made it impossible for 39% to be a victory. Second thing, though, is they beat the living piss out of the NDP because of the accord that they have with the Liberals, and they succeeded in that, and that turned out to be a big problem. So that was an extension of pounding the shit out of Trudeau, and it was a mistake, and it really, really hurt them. I think the other thing is they obviously should have dedicated a lot more energy to figuring out how to run against Trudeau. Like, I think their calendar going backwards should have been engineered to say, how do we make certain, without a shadow of a doubt, before anything else, that we make certain that Trudeau does not wriggle off this hook. And yes, please bring the beers,
Yes.
for Christ's sake.
This man's dying of
you.
thirst.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Lon. But honest to Pete, like, isn't that the story of this campaign? Imagine, ask a Liberal if they'd been knocking on doors tonight and they had Trudeau as the leader. All they would have heard of, they wouldn't have been confronted with Trump. They wouldn't have been told, oh, I really think Carney has the right resume. It would have been, Jesus Christ, is Trudeau here?
Totally. But Kory, can we pick up where Scott left off and come back to this Ontario question about the difference in the Ontario results? So that hard conservative positioning that Poilievre created for himself for 2 years and ran into this campaign with, that is going to generate 39% of the vote, is going to get beat decisively in Ontario. And in my view, it's not just their advertising against the NDP, it's frankly that version of conservatism so alarms the NDP that they feel they have to vote strategically in order to stop it. It's a bit like Harper in 2004 when he was unknown and we painted him as a complete demon and we were able to achieve the same factor. I mean, you have to find a way to win that doesn't make it look like a scary thing to everybody who isn't voting for you, presumably.
Yeah, I think that's all right. I'll argue with you about the 39 being a good number.
Okay, argue with me. Go ahead.
I will argue with you that because 39, if you're sitting at 65 in Alberta, is not 39, right? Here is why it's so difficult to win as a federal conservative. It is not one electorate. The conservative, electoral base and people who vote for their version of a conservative party in Atlantic Canada does not particularly look like what that looks like in Quebec or what that looks like in Ontario or what that looks like on the prairies or what that looks like in BC. And you are having to cobble together a very complex coalition with a lot of internal contradictions. And the person who did this the best, in my lifetime was Brian Mulroney in terms of being able to weave a thread through those things. Where you bring in the Lucien Bouchards, which are, more like a Legault, like they're a nationalist, they're a Quebec nationalist, but you're able to bring in, a much rarer version of conservatism in the Maritimes. You're able to bring in, Bill Davis type conservatives, which is kind of, what Ford is. Right. And you're able to bring in, more fire-eating firebrands on the prairies, and then BC is maybe the oddest coalition of them all because there's so much crossover with federal Liberals there. Yeah. But to win as a conservative is not about getting 39. It's about winning 5 regional elections or enough of those regions with what constitutes conservatism there and not put so much pressure on those fault lines. And Mulroney did this, I think, largely through force of personality and personal relationships. But but getting to 39, if it's way over-indexed in the prairies, is not only not going to win nationally, it's actually going to be counterproductive in some of those other regions. And so I think what we have is a conservative party where a real conservative is a prairie conservative. Look, I'm a prairie conservative. That's where I grew up. I was a member of the Reform Party. I worked for Preston Manning. I get all of that. But I've also won campaigns 3 in a row here in Ontario.
3?
And I know, 3.
Oh, wow, congratulations. Fuck, I had no idea.
Sorry, and it was not as running as a prairie conservative.
I won 1 in a row. Does that
but it was a really good one. But you need to have a coalition. But if Tim Houston is not on your team, then there is a problem with your coalition.
Right.
If Francois Legault, if this finance minister can't run for your party, he's not allowed to, then there is a problem with that coalition. If anyone who's a part of the Ford administration can't run for your party and you don't even talk to the guy, there is a problem with that coalition. If Mike de Jong, one of the most successful finance ministers and in terms of longest serving and a conservative, can't run for your party, there is a problem with your coalition. So if the idea is to impose one region's idea of conservatism on every other region in the country, you're going to fucking lose. And we're seeing an embodiment of that. And it doesn't matter what the national polling numbers are. If you're just over-indexing that, like say you did it a different way. Say it was the only type of conservative that's a, quote, real conservative is a Doug Ford conservative. You would be losing in all those other regions because, you know, that doesn't sell on the prairies. That doesn't sell in BC. That doesn't sell in Quebec. That doesn't sell in the Maritimes. You've got to try to create this complex coalition that's drawing people from each of these groups. And that's why it's so hard. That's why it's done so seldom in Canada. So I think that's point one. Point two, you know, and I guess we're going to get into mistakes and all that, but maybe I'll lead into it now. The biggest, you know, because you touched on it, Scott, the biggest mistake of this campaign was pushing through the most unprecedented in size and scope midterm advertising campaign, the Liberal Party and Justin Trudeau down to the teens. And at a certain point, when you push a party to a certain level, no matter how in control that leader is, no matter how indebted their caucus is to them, self-preservation kicks in. And that's what happened. You know, we pushed the Liberals down to like 18 points at their lowest, and self-preservation kicked in, and they got rid of Trudeau. If Trudeau could come back tomorrow, he fucking would.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this guy did not want to leave. And, you know, had they pushed him down, which wouldn't have taken much, to 30, or even to, you know, 27, like, they'd be running a campaign against Justin Trudeau, and it wouldn't fucking matter what was going on with Donald Trump. Right. The Conservatives would win, and win big. But the hubris of doing that, I think that is where this campaign was lost. It was lost before it started. It was lost because we so overperformed in the election between elections.
Drove Trudeau out.
We drove Trudeau out.
Yeah.
And just to add insult to injury, we then, you know, threw like several $1 million on the NDP and pounded them into fucking dust too. And so now we have the situation that we have now. So,
I mean, listen, I take no joy in it, but if there's one silver lining, it's karmic. It's karmic.
Karmic dust.
All right, let's
That's
do
right.
this. Let's do this best and worst. Let's start with the NDP.
Yes.
Best thing about the NDP campaign in this election, and I'll start, it's actually Jagmeet Singh. He's a terrible leader, and he's going to get absolutely smoked. And he does not have the skill set to lead a national political party, and that's unfortunate because I had him on the podcast, the Herle Birdie, and he seemed like a really, really nice guy, and that is where my thing is going to be, which is in the most dismal of circumstances. He's been an indefatigable campaigner in this election, and I've never seen anything like a bad look on his face, or like he is campaigning joyfully and energetically in what should be a forced march. So that impresses me. What's your best thing about the campaign?
Look, I think he's leaving it all out in the field, and I think there's something very honorable about that. And I do think that, you know, he's going to be remembered, I think, pretty well in terms of his accomplishments as an NDP leader. But this campaign it's like scaling a sheer rock face. It's very difficult. And I would say that the NDP campaign, I'm going to give two things that they've done well. I think it's been a focused campaign, message-wise, which is something that can be a rarity for the NDP. They've narrowed in on healthcare, protecting workers. They've driven the message with really good contrast stuff against Carney that ties back to his record at Brookfield. Like, all of that stuff has been textbook executed. It's been tight, it's been on point. It's just not been heard because of the context. The other thing I think that they did well is that the team that went into this, you know, they drew very senior people from all across the country. I'm sure it will shock everybody. There's not like 1,000 New Democrats working professional campaigns across the country, right? So like when the federal party runs a campaign, those are folks who are coming, you know, fresh off of wins in BC. They're coming from Manitoba. They're coming from Alberta. They're coming from Ontario. And they're clear-eyed about what this campaign is. And I think one of the smartest things that they did was shift their messaging relatively early in the campaign to talk about the value of preserving an NDP presence in the House. They did not wait, they did not hesitate, they did not blink, they went for it, they drove the message, they recut the ads, they did what they needed to do. And so in that sense, I think that regardless of what happens on election night, in the campaign period, there's not a lot to lament there. They did what they could with the circumstance that was given to them.
Right. Okay. Scott, anything you've liked about the NDP campaign?
Well, I'll pick up quickly on something Jordan said, which is I've been bewildered throughout this entire campaign that there hasn't been a savage assault in advertising, at the podium, in advertising, against Mark Carney. Like, what happened to tax havens? What happened to Bermuda? What happened to Brookfield? Like, he hasn't really had to sweat any of that shit. I don't understand it. I don't understand any of it. And all I would say as a good thing is, to the degree to which it's been brought up at the podium most effectively by the NDP. They didn't do a lot of it, but they did more of it inexplicably than the Conservatives did. My bad thing for the NDP.
No, we're not there yet.
I'm not there.
We're not there yet.
We were still.
There's time, Scott.
Kory, anything you liked about the NDP campaign?
I'm thinking. Look, I think they're doing the same thing that they did in Ontario, and so I'm going to give them a lot of credit for this. But the discipline to, in the face of absolutely horrific polling numbers, to focus all of your resources on incumbents and basically throw all the rest of your candidates to the wolves. Like, that is a really tough choice as a leader and as a campaign manager. And I'll say that we'll see whether it works, because I think they're doing the same thing here federally right now. But boy, did it fucking work in Ontario.
Yep, yeah, absolutely.
And in fact, I can't think of another example of a party having done that and executed it so flawlessly.
And so thoroughly.
So, we'll see what happens. I think that it's going to be a little trickier for them federally, because some of the folks that you would build that around, it's really around the personalities. So, like, I think they have that ability in Windsor West right now. They would have had that ability in Charlie Angus's seat if he'd stayed on. Mm-hmm. But it's really focusing around the individual. I do think they're going to have success in parts of BC. Like, I think Vancouver Island will probably go quite well for them. And it's going to go well because it's like, hey, look, the Conservatives scare the shit out of you. You don't want to have them, all of that. But we are the local option that has the ability to win here. And you've got to really, really press that message locally in order to have that outcome.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna bet as hard as the seat projections against the NDP, because I do think they have a proven ability to execute that kind of plan in other elections, including one very recently. So I would say that's the best thing about their campaign, is that ability to make that incredibly hard choice.
I did learn from Ontario, but I count me as skeptical, because Stiles was running at 18 to 20 points. Mm-hmm. And Singh is running nationally at like 8 points, and in BC at like 13 points. I don't think that's the critical mass required.
Well, I don't think they're running at 13 points in BC. I think they're running. I think they're running at 40 points on the island, and I think they're running at 0 points in some parts of the province. Right?
Sorry, Interior.
But that was the case in Ontario too. Like, it was not evenly distributed. Like, they had some seats where their vote went up, right? Despite the fact that their polling numbers had dropped provincially by like 15 points.
Right.
There's a dramatic difference between incumbent and non-incumbent seats in terms of the vote.
So how much that's being picked up, it's a mug's game trying to do seat projections off regional numbers on, from one polling source. The sample size is so small, it's like plus minus 7, whatever it is. And it's not granular enough to actually pick up what's happening, if that's what's happening. And we totally missed it in the provincial campaign, despite polling more than I think anybody has ever polled before.
That feels true to me.
So I'm prepared to skip the worst thing about the NDP campaign.
You don't have
Portion
to.
of it. I'm prepared to skip it if you'll all agree with me on this, which is from an electoral standpoint. And Jordan, I actually thought that when we talked about this on the pod a week or so ago, that you gave a really thoughtful answer to this about why the NDP do the things that they do.
It's a song, isn't it?
And your answer was, well, if we had done what you're suggesting, Pierre Poilievre would be the prime minister. And we had to consider that, think about that. So fair enough. But by pure electoral considerations, not bringing down Trudeau last fall is the decision that trumps all other
Yeah,
decisions.
100% agree.
No.
Great.
Yeah, I think that, well, and another way to put that is the eternal lesson for New Democrats, which is don't let the Liberals get up. Don't let the Liberals get up. And so I think there was obviously a moment there in the fall where it was possible to go to an election, as I had earlier advised and talked about, go at the moment of maximum possible weakness for the Liberal Party, regardless of it not being a perfect circumstance for the federal NDP. But look, I mean, I'd say, like, ethically I'm torn on that, right? Because if the party had done that, there would be no pharmacare, there would be no expansion of dental care, and we would have a Poilievre majority government. So even though as a partisan, I lament that, as a Canadian, I think it was probably the right call, which sucks.
Right. Okay. We can drop it from there. Let's go to the Conservatives. Scott, what is the thing you've liked about the Conservative campaign?
What is the thing that I've liked about the Conservative campaign? I have liked. Couldn't we not go to Kory?
Yeah.
I mean, in all honesty, I think they take a rap for not adjusting. I think they actually did make some adjustments, and I thought that they did a better job of more organically integrating Trump after the first 10 days. I think it's terrible that they didn't in the first 10 days. I think they started to, and and then they benefited from the fact that Trump drifted away. Although, as you pointed out just before we came on, he came barging back into the scene.
Yeah, I don't know if people in the room are aware of it, but Trump said this afternoon that the 25% auto tariffs could easily go up, and he said the basic message we want to send is we don't want your cars in the United States. We're going to make our own cars.
Just 4 days before the campaign, I thought the vote. I thought I'd just pop in and remind you I'm here. But I thought that they actually, they changed the podium, they moved some of their messaging around, and their tour, they've targeted the right places. I think the fact that they've spent so much time in BC has been smart.
Right. Okay, Kory?
I think their ability to have harnessed the enthusiasm of their sort of core activist base. And in addition, I would say, one of the achievements of Poilievre's leadership is he has made the party younger. Criticism would be that we've lost some of the older voters in the process, but if we could find a way to harness the energy of sort of Gen Z and millennial voters that he has truly brought in. You go to a Conservative convention now, it used to look a lot like a meeting in the common room of the senior center, right? Now it's a much livelier, younger, more millennial sort of affair, and that's really a credit to him because that I've been going to these things all my life. That has never been the case. So I think that's an achievement. I think it's been offset by some of the other things that we talked about, but you got to give credit where credit's due. No one else in my life in politics as a Conservative leader has been able to activate those younger demographics in the way that Poilievre has. And so good on him and good on them and that team for having been able to do that. And we'll see how that plays out, right? Those are important demographics in that I think they are more likely to go out and pound in lawn signs and canvass for you and do all those kinds of things that are really important parts of having a healthy political organization. The problem is, even in the advanced polls that we've seen, they just don't fucking vote. And this is the challenge, right? But not to underestimate the importance of having those people there and the size of the accomplishment for him to have brought those people in.
Okay, cool. Jordan, what do you think?
Yeah, well, so just to build on that, and for a hot moment, he was winning young women as well.
Yep.
And if the party ever manages
T-shirts.
to,
You skipped that. but
yeah,
I
it was
think
the.
shirts.
I assure you, it was not the T-shirts. And if they ever manage to durably thread that needle, that's really powerful. I would say the thing that I liked about their campaign is they do crisp contrast really well. Crisp messaging contrast is I think a hallmark of their campaign events. Now, it's like a hammer, so you have to be careful how you use it. And I would argue they probably overused it at some important moments this campaign, but they do it very well. And I think that up until 2 months ago, the public mood in Canada was such that people were ready for something a little bit more radical. They were ready for something that was different from status quo politics. And so that would have been an excellent fit for that moment. And in some ways, the situation that they found themselves in is a bit unpredictable. But that skill of being able to have a clear message contrast and driving that through every aspect of their campaign communications is a solid one.
Right.
Hey! Who scored, Aiken? Christ, I still didn't hear. Who scored?
Dvorak, of all things,
Dvorak.
that we got to win.
All right.
If Dvorak is scoring, we are winning.
Great.
So, that's for sure. I think you have to say from my perspective, the most impressive thing about the campaign. I'm not sure it was a good campaign tactic, but it nonetheless impressed me were the rallies, because I haven't seen that before.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any campaign be able to generate that number of people to come out, be that enthusiastic. I don't know, we haven't heard much about them, so maybe the numbers have tailed off a bit. But in the first 2 weeks of this campaign, they were drawing massive crowds, and that was impressive to me. Jordan, worst thing about the Conservative campaign?
I think their inability to follow through in the moments where they had clearly decided to change tack around Trump. So, as I said before, they had 3 or 4 attempts to do that over the course of the campaign.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, they were not able to hew to that. And I think that the false starts hurt them. I think that when Poilievre couldn't commit with his full chest to that shift in message, it hurt him. And I think it has been the core weakness, really, of their campaign, is his seeming inability to meet that moment. Yeah.
Scott?
Poilievre. I think he's actually been their biggest weakness. He's inflexible. His tone is Trump. He knows that his tone shouldn't be Trump. And then he says to Laura Stone, "Did you see how big my crowd was last night? Did you dig my crowd? Would you go home with my crowd?" Right? It was no good. So it was Poilievre.
Okay. Kory?
Well, I think I've already answered that one.
Yeah, but sum it up. Sum it up.
Look, it's driving Trudeau out of the race. And it happened before the campaign started, and I think it cost them the election.
Yeah. I think that campaign was in love with its candidate. Maybe because it was run by its candidate, but it was in love with its candidate. And it has only realized at the very end that Poilievre is not a strength of that party's efforts in this election. He's a drag on that party's efforts in this election. And they should have been running the Conservative alternative against the Liberal government the whole time along. They should never have been forcing a leadership comparison. And all those rallies and all that stuff did that too. It brought the leader to the fore. They never developed a team. They never introduced us to one person that might be important. Nobody has any idea who a finance minister might be. It's Pierre Poilievre, and people don't like Pierre Poilievre, except for the people running the Conservative campaign. So that's a massive mistake. Kory, what's the best thing about the Liberal campaign?
Mark Carney. If it was not for the change in leadership and somebody who is scoring well against Poilievre in that leadership comparison, like what you just talked about. Like the Liberals, based on the leadership score, should be winning a lot bigger than they're going to if they do win. They should be ahead a lot more than they are because he is polling way better than the party. He is the strongest asset that they have, and he is appealing to a very important chunk of the conservative base, which is the older males that we talked about. They are viewing it as a resume comparison, and look, let's just call a spade here. Mark Carney, between like 6 in the morning when he wakes up and 6:05, has thought more about the economy than Justin Trudeau would in probably an entire year. And conservative voters like that.
Yeah.
Conservative voters like that. So it's not just leadership popularity, it's the issues that he has leadership advantage on, which are traditionally conservative issues, minus crime. Like I think all of that stuff, the conservatives and Poilievre have been able to tap into that core base. But on economic management and growth and all of those kinds of things, those are typically huge conservative strengths. We normally are double digits ahead on those things against Liberal opponents. And Carney is double digits ahead of Poilievre on those issues. That's all uniquely related to the leader that they have. And so Carney is their biggest asset, and the Liberal Party and the 8 years of wokeness and apologies for everything and all the rest is the anvil that he's having to try to swim across the lake with.
Yeah. Scott, best thing about the Liberal campaign?
It's Carney. I'll just go one layer deeper in my perspective. I think it's been, for a guy who was never involved in politics, his ability, particularly at the beginning of the campaign, because they've obviously sagged in the middle, to capture the zeitgeist for a guy who's not a politician. And I'd say two things. One, that striking comment from the day that he launched the campaign where he said, listen, this relationship with the United States is over, right? It took a day, but the whole fucking world started quoting that line because they realized what he was really saying is the United States has decided to back away from being the hegemonic Western power that it has been since the end of the Second World War. And holy shit, nothing's ever going to be the same again. Right. And that's true for Canada, but it was true for the rest of the world, and it captured the zeitgeist, and that's why he's winning. And the second was when he said they want to break us so they can own us, and you were the first to flag it on the pod. But those two moments, for a guy who's not a retail politician and not a message machine and not great at the podium, holy snap, crackle, and pop, did he ever nail the zeitgeist? We
can save some time because I completely agree that that's the best moment of the Liberal campaign, and they've been living off that magic ever since. Jordan?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be a variation on a theme, but a little meaner, because I think it's not Mark Carney, it's the idea of Mark Carney. It's
not David Herle. It's
Mark Carney's
the
resume.
Thought you have of David Herle. It's the person you imagine waking up next to, who's made your coffee. No, he wouldn't make the coffee.
Do you want to talk to somebody about those dreams, Scott?
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think obviously he's somebody who brings an enormous amount of talent in the finance industry to the table. But I don't think he's actually that great of a politician. He's rough in his Q&As. He loves the policy detail. I see Tyler out in the audience. Everybody give that man a wave. I think that he will grow into the role, but I don't think he's there yet. And I think that what Canadians are putting their trust in is the idea of his competence, the certainty of leadership from somebody who knows their way around international financial issues. And that's a concept, right? And so I think that the campaign has been at its best when it's fed that idea, when it's fed that vision, rather than when it's presented fully unfiltered Mark Carney that might not live up to the book boyfriend fantasy.
Right. Right. Okay, let's quickly wrap this up. The worst thing about the Liberal campaign, I will say this, and God, it pains me, Scott, and it's no reflection on Jack, but I think the Liberal advertising has been the worst thing about the Liberal campaign. I think it has failed to match the level that Carney himself set in terms of the emotional reach of the campaign. I think this was a campaign that called out for a single meta-narrative, and they never established it and stuck to it. With the advertising, he was carrying it in the earned, but it wasn't being echoed effectively in the paid, and I think the only effective spot they really had was the contrast spot with Poilievre. I think none of the positive stuff reached the emotional capacity of what this campaign could have been, which could have taken him to a different level. What do you think?
I think the campaign went for a snooze a few days before the debates and never entirely woke up. So I think that the loss of momentum going into this last period has been really harmful. I think they haven't been able to crystallize that same anxiety around the Trump threat, and there were opportunities to do it that inexplicably they didn't seem to pick up on. And since that's the ballot question that's driving so much of their success, it seems to me to be a huge miss on their part.
Right.
Well, I love my son, Jack. And I look forward to the day that he'll return one of my phone calls.
Put him in charge of advertising. And it'll probably all go better, actually.
And I know that he's thought of as something of an angel that soars above the horizon within the ranks of creative currency. But I have to agree. I think the advertising, and I will not blame my son, but I will not embarrass him by saying anything more. I just don't think the advertising was what it should have been, what it could have been, and it was almost a clinic in how not to fulfill the potential of what you had right in your fucking hands, man. It was staring at you, and you just frittered it away to a bunch of digital horse shit.
Yeah, I'll say a version of the same, but maybe articulate it a little bit differently. I think the Liberal campaign has shown an inability to frame the ballot question in a consistent manner, and the advertising is part of that, but it's only part of it, because I think the platform failed in that respect. Like, I think a lot of what's come out of Carney's mouth and the decisions for message events have failed to do that too. Like, I think, and this is maybe the problem with...
I love your line about how it just flows from the fingers to the keyboard from the old Trudeau government.
Well, but I think that's what it is. Like, you've come in at the very last minute, and you've inherited a campaign team and a staff and an institution that has its own pattern. It has its own, way of talking about issues and the things that they put in the window. And I would just say, like, if any of that was working, they wouldn't have been at 18%, right? Like, that is what everyone is tired of. And I feel like there's a bit of wanting to, we're ahead. Let's now go back to what I think was always the Trudeau government's thing of, like, we were right all along. Housing's an issue now. We were always on housing. Didn't you know? You just weren't paying attention. We didn't actually do anything on it, but this is all part of our big plan. Like, we've always been doing this. There is a lot of self-congratulatory, histrionic bullshit involved in all of that. And the temptation to do that, it comes from the staff that you've inherited. It's come from the institution that you've inherited. And I keep using Ian Brody's line from the Herle because I think it's so true. The campaign that will do the best in this race is the one that shredded the most of the material that they had prior to Trump.
Yeah.
And took out a blank piece of paper and wrote a new script and wrote a new agenda and then stuck to that. But what you see is, like, periodic episodes of both of these campaigns getting onto a message frame that would work. The Conservatives periodically get on, you don't want 4 more years of Liberal government, which is the only thing they should have ever been saying around that. It's not, Carney's just like Trudeau, because he isn't. And it's not, any of that other stuff. Like, they're these are both like really bad campaigns. And the one that's the worst will lose, but it's not like one was good and the other was bad. Like they both kind of are bad, and both have moments of being, I think, on the right track. And the only consistent thing in the two main parties' election narratives is its inconsistency, their inability to actually create and stick to a frame in a ballot question and drive it all the way to the finish without getting distracted by either tips of the hat to what you were doing in 2024 if you're the Conservatives, or tips of your hat to the Trudeau legacy if you're the Liberals. And both of them are off track when they do that. But like there is a winning ballot question for both of these parties. It's just neither of them can stick on it for more than a day and a half.
It's fair enough, and it has to be the last word unless you have something.
I don't. Did I mention I love my son Jack? I feel it's important to say.
All right. Thank you all very much. Thank you to all you accursed out there in the audience. So delighted that you came to join us. Thank you to our sponsors, Enbridge and Can Do. And we will see you Friday morning with more of the Curse of Politics.